Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now today we're testing Forza Horizon 6 once again, this time with an older system that dates back to around 2014. I've had a few requests for this one, so this is my i7 4790K PC, or motherboard and CPU, and GTX 980. Now the 4790K is a quad-core 8-thread chip, still pretty capable, surprisingly so, in a lot of modern titles, though you should expect a few CPU bottlenecks in those more intensive games. The GTX 980 is a 4GB graphics card, a once high-end GPU that can now be found for a small fraction of its original price tag. How will this combination fare in Forza Horizon 6? Well, let's get into the game and find out. I'm also using 16GB of dual channel DDR3 clocked at 1866 MHz, and the i7 4790K has been overclocked to 4.5 GHz on this Asus Griffin Z97 board. As you can see, it was a brilliant start to the video. Forza Horizon did open, it fired up just fine with this hardware combination, but unfortunately the game did crash basically immediately. We'll try again and hope it goes a bit better. So it took longer than it has previously with other hardware to optimise the game for this machine. I'd say about 10 minutes this time around, but once we were in the game here, well, it's a pretty good result. We'll start off with the very low settings. I've recorded externally today because in the past videos I have been recording internally with the Windows game capture, and I've also been experimenting with NVIDIA overlay as well, which didn't want to work here because the 980 doesn't support the latest drivers. I think it worked before, all of a sudden, like the drivers updated, and then it told me that I can't use NVIDIA Shadow Play or overlay or whatever it's called now anymore. So I thought, okay, not too big of a deal because it did sort of ramp the CPU usage up a bit as well, as did the Windows capture. So I thought it was best to capture the game externally, just pointing my camera at the screen here. As we can see at very low, it's a fairly evenly matched configuration or pairing. The CPU and GPU both hitting at least 90% utilization most of the time, and the game running with over 80 frames per second. If we up the settings to low instead of very low, well, things do look a little better, and we're still able to hit at least 60 frames per second with this GPU and CPU combination, though there will be a lot more dips below this, especially in busier parts of the game, such as Tokyo City here. I always crash on that corner. I literally never slow down in time to make that corner. So in terms of VRAM, the 980 has 4 gigs, and we're pretty much maxed out in that respect. The CPU is sort of hanging back a little more now in terms of utilization with the low settings. As we can see, it's clocking at its overclocked speed of 4.5 GHz, running fairly warm, over 70 degrees. I've got a thermal right cooler on here, just a cheap one that I purchased from Amazon, but I wouldn't try and overclock this on an Intel stock cooler. It will just end in disaster, but you can certainly push things to low with Forza Horizon 6. Let's try medium now, however, and see how we get on. As you can see now, we're running at less than 50 FPS, but it is still a plus 40 FPS experience, which is pretty playable in my opinion. It's how I used to run games on my Steam Deck all the time. 40 FPS always feels so much better than 30 FPS, and it seems as though we have crashed. Yeah, pushing the game to medium or higher seems to cause an issue here. Now this is something I tested a few times. I was wondering if I could replicate it in this video, and it does seem that at native resolution, with anything higher than low or medium or higher basically, then the game does seem to crash. Now luckily we can make use of FSR. This has FSR 3.1.5 and it's going to help us hit closer to 60 frames per second with the 980. Now I've got to be honest, I wouldn't recommend pushing the game any higher than medium on this hardware. As it is, we're going to get a low VRAM warning. Not sure if I captured it here or included it with the final edit, but there was a low VRAM pop-up that occurred basically 2 seconds into switching to the medium preset. As we can see here though, with FSR balanced mode enabled, well, our average has been brought up closer to 60 FPS. We will indeed exceed that figure every so often, and from what I can see, or from what I've played, there were no more crashes with FSR enabled here, at least from within the sort of half-hour gameplay period that I continued playing this game for. Before, it was crashing a couple of times within sort of 10 minutes using this hardware, but now with FSR, it seems to be okay. It might not be in the long run, I don't know. All I can speak for is the time that I've spent playing on this CPU and GPU. And while medium with FSR balance does make things noticeably less sharp, it does seem to fix the problems we were having. And performance isn't too bad either. Despite still utilising basically all the VRAM the card has to offer, we are getting a fairly smooth and consistent experience even in this multi-competitor race here. I guess you could push things to high with an even more aggressive form of FSR, but beyond balanced and things start to look noticeably less sharp, and I don't think it's worth the trade-off, to be honest. I think a nice middle ground is the medium preset with FSR balanced, especially as you drive closer to Tokyo City, for example. As we can see here, just exploring outside of a race, 60 FPS is a more common occurrence. Oh, here we are, a low video memory warning just popped up now. That's what I was talking about before. But for the most part, 60 FPS isn't impossible to achieve with this setup that is over 10 years old. Both of these parts date back to 2014 and were considered high-end at their respective release dates, even up to a few years after they were still pretty strong components. And I have to say that you will still get some surprising results even today. If you're playing an optimized game released in 2026 and one that still supports this hardware, which every game should, unless it requires ray tracing, the CPU is certainly supported, but like I said at the start, you might run into a few processor-intensive scenarios and therefore be met with a lot of stutter. Even here and overclocked, the i7 will struggle a little bit in some instances, but nice to see this old 4-core 8-thread legend is able to play this title with relative ease, providing you make a couple of sacrifices to the visuals and the native resolution. This is probably going to be my last Forza Horizon 6 test for a while. I don't want to overdo it. I'm going to include this game in the benchmarks from now on, testing various graphics cards and CPUs, but this will probably be my last video dedicated entirely to the game itself. But thanks for watching. Hopefully this is helpful. I'm not sure if whether or not the game will launch will depend on the motherboard you have. For example, some support secure boot and some don't. I don't have a cheaper board to actually test it with. I did, I no longer do, but hopefully this is still helpful regardless. And as always, leave your thoughts down below in the comments. Thank you as always for watching, and hopefully I'll see you all in the next one.